Hello and welcome to NJ Biz Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Kanige. My guest today is a great friend of the show, and he's CEO of OceanFirst Financial. That's Chris Maher. Chris, welcome back.
Great to see you, Jeff.
Good to see you too. I have to start. It's always good to check in with you about what's driving the economy, both in New Jersey and around the country. So I have to start today with the big news over the weekend for viewers who are tuning in now. We are speaking on June 23rd. Over the weekend, the United States attacked Iran in an effort in what the Trump administration says is an effort to degrade their nuclear weapons capabilities. Today, Iran has retaliated, firing missiles at American installations in the Middle East. There's concern about commodities prices, particularly oil. Given the continuing turmoil in Gaza, Ukraine, and elsewhere, does this sort of thing, what looks like a war, is this going to have some significant drag on the economy, do you think?
Well, Jeff, it's a little bit too early to tell. What we did see, which is interesting, when this first started, when Israel started their attacks about a week ago,
Right.
we saw the commodities markets kind of dislocate at that point. You saw oil go up quite a bit and expressing those concerns about, would there be a broader issue that we had to worry about in terms of inflation in the economy and people's
Right.
decisions. Interestingly, since the events of the last couple of days, the commodities have stabilized and oil's even come down a little bit.
Mhm.
So there's two sides to this coin. One side is obviously the disruption in the Middle East could cause issues here. The other side is there is a view among some that this has de-risked the environment somewhat, in that it is unlikely we're going to have nuclear weapons in Iran, at least for the foreseeable future. So you have to kind of look at it both ways. We'll see in the coming days how that sorts out.
Yeah, do you think that explains some of the reaction that we saw in the markets today? The Dow, for example, and some of the domestic U.S. markets stocks declined and then recovered, and are for the most part, I think, the last time I checked, are in positive territory again. And you mentioned oil prices coming back, going down again a little bit. Does that account that sort of double-edged sword that you're talking? Is that accounting for that sort of those sorts of dynamics?
Yeah, I believe so. And Jeff, we're still in the early hours and days and assessing what this means. But one of the biggest economic threats would be closing the Strait of Hormuz and
Right.
kind of restricting the amount of oil that can get through there. Predominantly, that oil goes to China. Um, I guess one of the things you could look at in the response from Iran, which obviously we don't want to have anybody firing shots at anyone, but
Mhm.
that response was not to close the Straits of Hormuz.
Right.
And we can just hope and pray that this is something that should be de-escalating now. And if that's the case, then I don't think it'll have an outsized impact on the economy.
Okay, and I'm guessing that it wouldn't necessarily be in Iran's interest or any other countries in the Middle East to have that sort of reaction.
Yeah, that's the trap.
Mm.
Iran is dependent upon oil exports. So closing the Straits of Hormuz really hurt them as much as anybody else, maybe more than everyone else. So hopefully we won't see that happen. Hopefully we're in a de-escalation phase, but it certainly warrants watching.
Okay, and obviously, if the situation does deteriorate, then you'd have to watch much more closely about those kinds of things.
You would, although we've got a large internal economy here in the U.S. and we have a substantially lower dependency on oil than we did decades
Right.
ago, when it would have been a more significant issue. In some ways, the higher oil prices help certain parts of the U.S. economy. So it's kind of a very complex soup. It's very hard to figure out.
Okay. All right. Moving on to some of the other things, maybe some more prosaic subjects. I'm curious though about the changing trade policies and how that's working. I mean, we've done a lot of work here at NJ Biz covering what the tariffs, what kind of effects the tariffs would have to a certain extent. Some companies have been able to cope with it more or less. Others are really struggling. What are you seeing? What are you hearing from your clients, from your customers? Are they basically making do now, or are they concerned about what this could lead to?
Yeah, it's also still early days. It relates to tariffs because we don't have the settled landscape. Our clients are telling us, though, that for the most part, the vast majority of them are able to deal with things either through a combination of inventories or on having secondary and tertiary suppliers, or even managing, the exact customs code of the things you're importing, because
Okay.
depending on what that code is, you'll see what the tariff is. For the most part, they're reporting to us they still see order books being very strong.
Okay.
They're still seeing confidence in people making decisions. You even saw a snapback in consumer confidence in the last couple of weeks, which is a very interesting thing. One of the issues to be concerned with is that the consumer became so distracted by this issue that they stop spending, that could be an independent but significant problem of its own that would be more about mentality and kind of the confidence people had and less about the actual economics. So it seems to be settling down. It doesn't seem to be causing any lasting damage at this point, but it's still early.
Right, it's still early, and the policies do seem to change fairly quickly depending on what's happening in Washington. I'm interesting you mentioned consumer confidence because obviously consumers are a major driver of domestic consumption, well, domestic economy. But you're not hearing a lot of talk about inflation, about food prices, for example. What consumers are having to pay when they put food on the table. Is that still the case? Is that getting better?
We've seen two interesting things. First, inflation has come down. Now, we're all concerned that that may reverse a little bit because of the tariffs, but in the last couple of months, it's moderated. You also have to look at the inflation expectations that people have, and this is a kind of a really key point. The expectations will tell you how consumers are feeling, what they are going to look for in terms of wage increases and what they're willing to pay. And those expectations about inflation out 2 years and 5 years from now have actually moderated a little bit in the last couple of months, which is very good news.
Okay, right, and because as I mean, economists will tell you and have said that expectations can drive inflation just as easily as tariffs can. If people expect to pay more, they're probably going to.
That's right. And there's this concept of anchoring. So
Hmm.
once a consumer has kind of anchored in their head that they expect inflation, it's very difficult to get that perception to change. So we're starting to see a positive change, but there's a lot of volatility, as you pointed out. There's a lot more time between now and when everything's finally settled. So we have to keep watching it.
Okay, another big geopolitical issue is the immigration crackdown in Washington. Foreign-born workers are important to the economy of New Jersey in particular. Again, what are you seeing? What are you hearing about the ability to find workers to get people to fill the jobs, particularly down the shore, where during the pandemic and when visas were hard to come by, a lot of those businesses kind of suffered.
Yeah, the good news is we're not experiencing anything like we did during the pandemic,
Mhm.
which is a very acute labor shortage. We do have some customers letting us know that labor is kind of tight. Labor is a challenge for them, particularly in the trades. But we've also seen in some of those immigration enforcement actions a de-emphasis of manufacturing sites and trade sites and things like that. So hopefully, we'll have to wait and watch over the coming weeks, but we have not seen an acute issue raised from that just yet.
Okay. Now, all of this, though, it sounds what I hear you saying, I think, is that for the most part, businesses are taking most of this in stride. They're not delaying decisions on spending, for example, or hiring. Is that the case, or are the folks you're talking to still pretty confident about where things are going? Because after all, I mean, we're talking about uncertainty. There's never perfect certainty anywhere. You can't predict the future. But on the other hand, is there enough visibility into what's going to be happening in the last half of the year for these folks?
So we do have a few clients that are being very careful about capital projects. So they've either deferred something or kind of put the pause button on as they wait and see how things are going. But that's a very small percentage of the work we've seen. So by and large, that doesn't seem to be causing a drag,
Okay.
but it is impacting things. And we could see a little bit more growth. The sooner we resolve tariffs, and the other big thing is the big beautiful bill, right, which
Okay. Right.
impacts taxes and all that. Business owners need to understand the tariff situation. They need to understand the tax regime before they can make big capital investments. So it is important that these issues get settled. It's actually could be even more important that they get settled than
Mhm.
exactly the formula under which they're settled.
Right. Again, because as you just said, you need to know what the what the rules are, right?
That's right. You're not going to build a factory. You're not going to invest in a factory that's going to operate for the next 10 years based on a policy that's going to last for the next 90 days.
Okay. So should businesses be taking that into consideration now, or if not, what should they be doing? Would you advise folks to hold back on making those kinds of big decisions, or just go ahead and hope for the best?
I think it depends very much what segment of the business they're in.
Okay.
So there are some long-term investments you can make around, say, cyber security, artificial intelligence, anything
Hmm.
that's defense contracting. These are on long-term cyclical positive trends.
Okay.
I would be a little bit more concerned, or not concerned, but a little bit more careful about investments where we don't have settled policy, like around in the healthcare world, because reimbursements under healthcare are a moving target right now. So
Mhm.
making a
Right.
big capital investment based on your understanding of current policy around medical reimbursements from Medicare, Medicaid, I'd be a little bit more cautious.
Okay. Uh, Closer to home, we mentioned the shore. I'm wondering if you've gotten an early read on how things are going thus far this season, the tourist season. The weather's been, weekends have been pretty lousy for basically since Memorial Day and even before. What are you hearing from business owners down the shore about how things have started out this summer?
Well, we've heard a lot about the weather. You're absolutely
I'll
very
bet.
right, Jeff. What we're seeing is kind of two impacts. They're kind of offsetting each other. There is a slightly higher level of vacancy this year than last year.
Okay.
Just a couple percentage points. It's not a significant thing, but the rates in many areas are a little bit higher, so that the dollars coming in are about the same with a little more vacancy.
Oh, okay.
The concern is later in the season, we really hit our stride now from mid-June until the end of August is the peak time.
Right.
And
School is
there's
out now, so
that's
yeah.
right. Yeah, absolutely. There is a little bit of a concern in
Mhm.
Cape May County, which tends to be slightly more dependent upon the Canadian traveler. So we'll have to make sure we see
Oh,
those our friends from Ontario coming down and spending like they usually do.
okay. All right. Also, in New Jersey, the budget process is heating up, I guess, in Trenton. There are no hearings scheduled that I know of today, but they are coming up on a deadline. How is that? How are you? What are you hearing about that? And is there any concern about what the budget might bring?
Look, I don't think the budget's going to make a big difference to our local economy this year.
Okay.
I think what's probably bigger is whatever impacts we see coming out of the governor's election, the gubernatorial election later in the fall, and seeing if there are any policy shifts we need to be careful about or thoughtful about. So we're watching this budget. It will have impacts. It will impact certain segments a little more and a little less, especially at a time where federal funding has fallen off for many nonprofits and
Hmm.
groups like that. But we're
Okay.
watching for longer term, we're watching more of the governor's election.
All right. Well, you did anticipate my next question, which was about the gubernatorial election. We now have two candidates. Are you expecting any kind of major policy changes, given who the two candidates are, no matter who wins?
Look, it's still early days. I'm excited to see both candidates kind of come out, talk to us about their plans. Obviously, we've heard a lot during the primaries, but primaries are not the greatest indicator of where people want to go. Now that we're in the general election, we'll be talking about, I'm sure, issues like property taxes and development, and what what the policies are going to be to try and bring jobs and keep jobs here in New Jersey. So we're watching eagerly, looking forward to it, but it's a little too early to tell on both sides.
And a major component of all of this is electricity prices, which we were expecting to spike this summer. And as we're talking today, it's 97 degrees out with 110-degree heat index. Again, is that likely to be a drag as we
Well,
go through the summer?
look, electricity prices are a fundamental and important part of the economy for many reasons.
Right.
Obviously, much more of our economy runs on electricity than, say, oil and gas as it did years ago. But when you think about the trades of the future, you think about AI, you think about where our economy is going, having an effective and low price of energy is key to all of that. So the other thing is that electricity prices tend to impact low-income families far more
Mhm.
than middle income or high income families because a higher percentage of what they spend is spent on electricity. So in a way, when your electricity rates creep up, that's a very regressive tax on low income families. So I think we need to be very seriously looking at this. It's about manufacturing, it's about AI, it's about equity in our economy and treating low income families appropriately. So it is an important issue and it should be top of the agenda.
Right. And businesses have been complaining about high energy prices forever. It's one of the drawbacks of doing business here. Yes.
Absolutely. When you look at economies where the electricity price has gone up even higher, say in many countries in Western Europe, it has had a significantly negative impact on manufacturing, on R&D, on development, and we don't want to be in that position.
Okay. So, given everything that we've talked about and what you've been hearing, what do you think about the way the rest of the year is going to go? Are you confident that the economy is going to continue to grow? Are you cautious? What do you think about where we're going here?
Well, I'd say, Jeff, we're cautiously optimistic. So the resilience on the part of the consumer has been notable.
Mhm.
The feedback we're getting from our commercial clients throughout our whole footprint here in New Jersey, but in New York, Pennsylvania, other areas as well, has been reasonably positive. But this uncertainty that we've talked about several times is holding us back. So the faster we can get that resolved, the better. I will say that our loan pipelines are among the highest they've ever been.
Okay.
That's in residential as well as commercial. So we're seeing demand. We've got a few projects on the sidelines. I think the construction market is a little bit slow, but I think we could get resolution around the national policies around tariffs and taxes, and then the local policies around property taxes and development. We think the second half of the year should be positive, and it
Okay.
could lead to a much more positive 2026.
And it sounds like your business, OceanFirst, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, we're doing great. One of the positives of the current rate environment is it's allowing the rates to normalize, and most banks, including OceanFirst, have had a positive improvement to margins and earnings in the last few months, and we hope to see that tailwind over the next year or two.
Okay, very good. Chris Maher, CEO of OceanFirst Bank and OceanFirst Financial, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you'll come back again, as you always do, and give us the benefit of your insights.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe, everyone.